approximately when, getting close to 2 years. March, I showed up, and I remember the headlines in the newspaper were toilet paper hoarding. It was like, what is going on with our world that toilet paper has made the headlines and people are hoarding it off the shelves, and newscasts had all that going on. And we all know that, if you will, was like for lack of a better word, I don't know if it triggers the big change, the big shift that's going on, that God's doing or is happening in the world, that God's taking advantage of and shaking things. But that was one of the rarest things I've seen in my lifetime, that hoarding toilet paper would be to the place where we, even for my wife's birthday in March, someone sent us a box full of toilet paper. It came FedEx to our doorstep, and she literally had been praying for toilet paper. So it was one of those strange beginnings to what became 2020 at the time. And for us, we headed right into that, some crazy news with our daughter getting the cancer had come back. And that really put us into quite a unique time. And for those who know, sometimes there were some of the prophetic words out there that suggested even by Easter, it would have lifted in 2020. My wife and I were talking about it last night and just went, isn't that interesting how, there was this hopeful kind of belief that it'd be over very quick. And little did we know that it would take us, not just past that Easter, but all the way to another year. And it looks like we're coming into another Easter season, still in the midst of what is one of the biggest changes that has gone on, at least in our lifetime on the planet. Most of us haven't been around in 1916 and the Spanish flu or any of those kind of things, or the Second World War or any of that stuff. So it's all kind of new for us, but yet for God, it's nothing new. He knows all this stuff. So we're going to talk about transition really quick and talk about where we're going a little bit. And I just need to catch us up for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to jump into talking with Jodie, actually, because she's been going through transition, and I'll explain why we're going to draw out stories. And this could be one of many that will come out in this next year, actually. But there's a reason behind that, and feel very clear to let us know about it, especially in these unique times. So I'm going to start with this quote, and I heard it probably a year or so ago, and I felt reminded to mention it. But it's a simple quote. It says, most people, Christians, often get discouraged and disillusioned when they overestimate what God is doing in the short term and underestimate what he is doing in the long term. Let me say that again. Christians often get discouraged and disillusioned when they overestimate what God is doing in the short term and underestimate what he's doing in the long term. You could suggest that quote applies to what's going on in the world, but you could also apply it to yourself. 3 years ago, at this time of year, our community, in the midst of lots of transition, many people in our community were, not saying it out loud, but there was a sense of what the heck is going on. We seem to be losing a sense of some of the systemized ways that we did our Christianity as a community before. And someone told me about that, and I said, okay, God, what do you want to say? And he said, I will give it to you. We're going to write a fasting guide, and I'll give it to you, and people can then ponder that. So 3 years ago, some of you on the screen might have participated in that. And I sat down, I tried to write it, nothing came. And I said, God, you told me you were going to give it to me. And he said, I didn't tell you I'd give it to you all at once. I'm going to give you a piece every evening, and then it would get posted the next day. And for those who were conscientiously going after what was on the website or reading the email, they could drink it in. But the very first thing he said leading to this, he said, if people want to know what I'm doing in my church, and I'll stop there for a minute. I thought he was talking about UChurch, and he was, but he was talking about his whole church and his whole everything. He says, if people would like to know what I'm doing in my church, he's the head of his church, his body, his family, he said, have them turn to the person on their left and they're on the right and ask this question: what am I doing in their hearts? And whatever they answer, if it's coming from their heart, that is what I'm doing in my church. That's what I'm doing. if we need to know how to get through the next few years or whatever this shift is going on, some of these changes take a long time. Jesus and the disciples, they had no clue when he left them and said, someone greater is coming. And then in Pentecost, when the very Spirit of God came into them, and sonship, as Paul writes in Galatians, the spirit of sonship was poured into their hearts. They began a journey of walking with God as their Father, just like Jesus called him Father for those 3.5 years. But they had no idea what was going to happen in the next years ahead. They had no idea of the destruction of the temple. That was the end of Judaism as the primary religious structure. They didn't know that the grace of God would saturate through Asia. Right now, for us to try and figure out the future and put that in place and say, this is where we're going, let's line up and get in step, we'd be doing the Spirit an injustice we'd miss out on what he's really doing within us. And so, but we underestimate what he's doing long term because we have such limitations of how we can see how far out. But we all kind of know this, that Philippians 1:6, when Paul prays, I am praying with full confidence that he will complete the work he started in you. He wasn't talking about the organizational church. He wasn't talking about Christianity. He was talking about his people, his church, his family, his sons and daughters. And as we go through transition individually, we are a part of his body. And as we share that, and as we go through that, we're going to learn and gain strength and encouragement along the way. And so we're not looking for an external, we know there's a bunch of shaking going on. So probably 2 verses, it was 2 years ago the beginning of this year last year when the pandemic started, Isaiah 43 became just a huge verse that came to us. And I'm not going to take the time to read it all, but if you haven't read that verse, but it was very clear. This was just a number of senior leaders in our city and in the nation, but it struck me at the same time. And then I found out from them, but you know the verse, it says, forget the former things. Can't you see I'm doing something new? In fact, the seed has already been planted and is being watered and is growing. I put it in the post that's on our website. Eric posted it a couple of days ago. It's just in the post section. And the reminder of what he's doing in us goes back to remembering what he's said to us already. And how do we get through this wilderness between what we used to know and where he's taking us? And not just us as a corporate or this people on the screen here or those listening, but his family. He loves us beyond our comprehension. He has just can't wait to comfort us and nurture us and lead us into that land of promise that is not just a physical sense, it's an internal reality of the kingdom. Jesus used the word kingdom more than any other terminology in the New Testament, and Paul did as well, 15 times in Paul's letters, 150 some odd times the kingdom is mentioned. And sometimes if someone had asked me to describe the kingdom 20 years ago, I probably would have been very descriptive on what it would look like and say externally. But I would have made some reference about the internal. But there's a mystery that's being revealed to us. And that is simply this, that Christ is forming within us. Our hearts are becoming like his. We're being transformed. And the things that are being shaken are anything, whether it's the institutions in the world, whether it's political or medical or any of those things, they're all getting shaken. And the question is, well, aren't they good? Yes. But Hebrews 12 tells us that everything will be shaken. The Message version describes one last shaking. It's reference to the first shaking, which was back at the Mount when people were afraid of the shaking when they came out of Egypt. And a lot of people are fearful of the shaking. Institutions are being shaken. The church is being shaken. The ways that we've done things. Why is it shaking? It's simply shaking because if there's anything that we're putting our faith in, we're putting our sense of security in, outside of the kingdom of God, then that's false territory. We won't be able to experience what Lance said earlier, stepping in and beginning to grow in this land of promise. And so he's going to take us on a transitional journey. We're definitely on the precipice of something fresh that God is seeding into the world. How long it'll take to seed it and water it and see it grow, that's not in our hands. As much as I would like to control how long the wilderness season is and the transition is, because we all like a little bit of assurance. He says our assurance and our security and our peace comes being in him. And this is part, if you want to put the big bow on this, it's a huge journey that we're going on internally, collectively, into that place. So I wrote this in the post on coming in the year, and I said, it's going to be a very good time to lean into our hearts and seeing how Abba is making himself known to us. If you remember coals, briquettes, the old charcoal, you take a bag, you put it you throw lighter fluid on it, you throw a match on it, and slowly it lights up, and then the flame disappears, and then this heat amongst them, they eventually turn white hot. If you were to take a pair of tongs, though, and you take one of those coals out and you put it on the side, while it's white hot, it actually will retreat back to its former, it'll go back to being black. Only the edges, if it got really white hot, don't. In other words, we're like coals. In this transition, the closer we get, the more we're connected with one another. Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there he is in the midst. As we share and go through our transitions and encourage one another, there will be, if there he is in the midst of that. It's interesting to me that those coals, not one of those coals is the super coal. There's no leader on top. There's no leader coal who speaks constantly and says, this is what it is and follow me. God's heart is all his children would cross into this land, into this promise. And when they're together, when those coals are together, they mutually fire each up. They mutually heat one another and receive from one another. It's basically, for lack of a better word, in the royal wedding that happened, the preacher talked about this fire. Love is like a fire. And when we're isolated, when we pull back and wait for the external things to happen, we will, if you will, miss out on the joy that's in the midst of this season. We'll start looking at the weapons of mass distraction that originate in our heart, that we're looking for something external to us. And so one of the big things going on right now is the freedom for us to go through transition and be comfortable, if you will, in it, as much pain as it brings. And it will be challenging. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For those of us can go back in our own lives and think of transitions we've been through, leaving jobs or going from singleness to marriage, or from going through some tough stuff. Some of you I know have all gone through some incredible things. The change may have happened physically around you, but the challenge is the internal transition your heart has to do. The reassortment of your theology about what you believed and how your heart put its hope in those things. So this is an important next week for those who are, would like to participate. We're going to do a corporate fast. And you can participate in any way, shape, form. On the web is the guides for families, this incredible, neat family guide that we've never had before. And it's going to, for me, it's just simply, all we can do right now is make space for him to move in our hearts. And this is okay, beginning of 2022, to just say, I encourage you, drop the gadgets for a week, slow down the entertainment feed, the weapons of mass distraction, all those comforts that we've leaned into during a time of COVID. Maybe it's okay to just take some extra days, some extra time, and ask him these questions. What are you doing in me? Show me what we're doing. And then when we get together next Sunday or beyond that, we can actually continue to share and be the fire, if you will. What he's doing in us will come out of us, and it will allow others to continue their fire and mutually infect each other. There's a lot to be said. But one thing about Isaiah 43 is this. He says, I will lead you through the wilderness, and there'll be flowing streams in the wilderness. there'll be this place as you're going through where the rivers of living water are watering those seeds that he's planted in us during a wilderness season. A wilderness season is transition seasons, and they feel lonely, but Jesus went through his. There's so many of them recorded in scripture. We don't have time to go through them all. And you have to go through it personally, individually. But as soon as you're going through it, there is an awareness. It's even Jesus's wilderness experiences were recorded for human history to read about. They were shared. And so that's why transition is important. So we're going to shift right now and going to talk about transition more on a very practical, real level with and just to honor Jodie here. Jodie's been probably a part of UChurch community, I think, at least or longer than I have. And
sure, longer.
And she's been through a ton of transitions and is in a significant one now. And a few of us have been chatting, and including herself, with Dave and Rob and others. And just it's a big enough transition that it affects all of us. And isn't this cool? Let's listen a little bit to and ask her some questions about her transition and drink from her, because her transition, if you will, or what she's experiencing and how she's going through it, will be helpful for how we're going through ours. And that's how this works with one another. So we're going to stop that part, and we're going to do that for the recording because we might send out her transition just on its own. So Jodie, welcome to this morning, the first Sunday of 2022 with this crew online. And there's so much we could say about you, but I spent all my time just, talking about you. So, but we want to hear from you. And Jodie has earned a reputation that's a fun moniker that's been put on her these last few years, especially one called interpreter. She's been able to take some of the events and even what's going on in UChurch in a bigger picture. And she's been basically overseeing tons of things in the community, and very integrated. There's so many things I could say about it all, but I'll let her talk about what's going on in her, and we'll start there. How about that? So tell us, Jodie.
Just go.
We have some questions, but I know you could just start off, but you go talk about transition. What's going on? I just said a bunch of stuff, and see if you can interpret and leap off of that one.
Interpret and leap. All right. Well, I will, I don't really have a message on transition, but I really felt just because of the nature of it, won't bury the lead for long. And some of you already know what is going on, but I just loved the opportunity to share how this came about, and just what we're all processing, me personally, and then just as a result as a family, just some of the practical things that are coming from this. So I actually thought it would be, Brant said that he might have been at UChurch before, but I actually distinctly remember the first day an old guy with a beard showed up in UChurch. Old meaning he was probably 10 to 15 years older than
37.
Yeah, he wasn't that old. But we were a group of primarily campus students. So I joined UChurch when I was in my first year of university. Joined UChurch. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I came and never looked back, if that makes sense. I stumbled across the little tiny room we were meeting in, and twice I was on my way to play basketball on campus, and I heard the music and I felt this draw, and I went and peeked, and I chickened out twice before ever stepping in, because there were 20 people in the room and half of them were on the worship team. So you would have been noticed. And so this was in 93, I think, early 93. And anyway, I it's just been a long time. To say the least, I've seen our church family go through a ton of transition, and it's been so much fun. I'm someone who really enjoys change, generally speaking. I don't mind, in my wiring is to be able to let go of something that we've worked on really hard and and go after the next if it makes more sense. And so when God does that to us, or when we go through transition, I'm often a person who's in the middle of it and loving it. And so it's been neat to go to see UChurch from, the 20 people back then, mostly students, and Catherine, she was there back then, Catherine Williams, and a few others, Kevin, to, just this, it's just so many shifts. We've been through every big university classroom on campus in the journey. Like, they kept on having to get bigger, and was at the middle of all of that from an administrative perspective, just from caring and being part of the community and that sort of thing. And so this last couple of years, it's been super obvious. The word has come up 8 million times, transition, change, what's the new, and all of that. And I've had just so much fun in the context of it. Now, the other thing I should mention is through the years, probably since, I was still a student, I had started, volunteering to count the tithe or to do like some of the admin stuff around there. So I have quite the history of admin related and finance related things in UChurch as well. It's not been constant 100% through that time frame. I've had children and gone on maternity leave. I worked in Vancouver for a while, but still connected to the ministry, to Every Nation at that time, a kind of a national thing we had going on. And so I've just been in and out throughout the years, connected to admin and finance and that sort of thing. And so, so where I find myself now, it's been in this last 2 years. It's been really interesting because I have had a lot of fun walking with people. Like Brant says, what he began with is like, if you want to know what's going on in our church, like talk to the people around. And so I just was having so much fun, like finding out what God was doing. I love, like he said, interpreting. And so I would just listen to people as we talk. And sometimes these conversations started with like, we need budget to do something, because that was my role or job. And other times I would just like want to jump into these conversations. And so I really began enjoying just seeing what God was unfolding, to a point where I missed that he was actually doing that in me personally over this last year. Super interesting that I just began feeling that there was a shift coming, but I just assumed that because I'm part of UChurch, I was just part of the overarching thing. Like that we all go through this as a family. And I don't know how I missed it, that this was happening in me at the same time. I don't know that I missed it. It's just, I was a little late to the game. I had to have some people help me understand that maybe, Jodie, there's a shift happening. And so I'll just share what that shift is, so that you're not wondering anymore. And it's simple, but it's impactful to how we run as a community. So I mentioned that I've been part of the financials and admin and that kind of thing. And so I have just really felt that there is, that I am to actually leave and lay down doing all of that, not to leave UChurch, not to leave I don't know what this will do to how I don't know what it'll look like in the end, but what I do know is that I'm meant to be done dealing in finances and admin. So what this means and why it was a hard thing to just say is it's been what I've done for 25 plus years in some capacity. All of the fun conversations that I've had around, not all, but many, have come as a result of interacting from that role, from that place of, what's in your heart to do. It's a budget conversation. Let's think about finances differently. What's God saying? All of these, it's just been so much fun to dream with people. And so it was sort of a interesting thing to come to, that maybe God was asking me not to handle all of those things anymore. So, I'm not too sure where to go. I'm like, there, I said, it's really probably not that big a deal. It doesn't seem, but in my heart, this was huge. Not necessarily because my identity was wrapped up in it. I feel like God in this journey of being a daughter has really delivered that from me. He actually asked me, or I in a conference with the Lord about 6 years ago. I had been not super involved in finances and that sort of thing, and he had, like, we very much saw that it was a time to step back in fully to do a few key things that I sensed at that time would take about 5 years. And it's been about 6 since then. And I assumed that God would just, like what I had started doing earlier on in this year before this kind of decision to actually transition out, was to just reorganize a few things, get them a little more efficient so I could oversee and actually do less. And that wasn't it. It was actually God asking me to step fully out of this. And so I don't know what the timing is. There's obviously lots of transitions around that, which I won't go into here, but yeah, it's unfolding, that's for sure. And it's been really fun to walk through with processing this with those who will process with me. And yeah, I'll just stop there for a sec, because maybe there's a different direction I should go.
Oh, we had a couple of questions that we thought would be good to ask Jodie, to just keep drawing it out, because she's in transition, but she's a part of the family in many ways. Obviously, we all are in his family. And so I think it's best if I can summarize this, Jodie, that we've been in transition for a number of years now, and as a community, and it's been a slow burn. We didn't realize it. We were hanging on to certain things to the past, and he kept shaking things. And we've walked through journey into the healing of broken hearts. We've journeyed into the place of intercession to listen, spend a lot of time listening to the Father now, just to God, what he's doing, instead of just presuming on him. And it's created lots of transitions that you've been in the middle of all, but all of a sudden you're going through one. And so that's why this is so unique. So one of the questions, because every one of us is in some degree of change going around us in the world, or maybe personally, some more than others could talk about it. But one of the questions came up, what fear, is there any fears that have come up in the transition, as you're dealing with, as you have to, quote, letting go, and without knowing? It's like Abraham leaving, stuff behind that was his whole life. And Hebrews says he didn't even know where he was going yet, but yet he was in movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting about this one, I mean, the reason this one is a little trickier for me, I've been through many transitions, as we all have, and they haven't seemed to be as surprising. This one just is, because it's I'll just go to the directly answer your question about the fear. My biggest fear in this transition is that not that I would let people down, that it would be hard for others. Just from a system financial perspective, the way that it has gone over the last 3 years of God really having an undoing of the systems and structures within the context of UChurch, there's still some key things that have had to keep going. The lights have had to stay on, if you will, like the power, meaning as a entity, we have money coming in and out. And so I always just, in this transition, to allow for others to step out into the next phase or whatever, because it's what I do it well, I just made a really efficient kind of way to figure out, how to pull off the minimum, yet in line with what the Holy Spirit was doing. Like, it was always really fun for me, but we come to this point where it's so minimal, and it comes through me from not that I'm a bottleneck per se, but it's just what's happened in this undoing. I have felt that, oh man, if I just step out, what's that going to do? Like, I am fully aware that anyone can step in and handle finances, but can you handle a conversation with Brant and interpret what that means? And then over here, like, there's just a uniqueness that I've brought, because I've been part of this family for 30 years. And so I think the biggest fear is, like, can God handle it? Which is lame to say. I know he can, but the fear in my heart is, like, I don't want to cause pain for others in this transition. I don't want, like, there's a lot of stuff that I've just done for years that nobody knows about, and it's been fine. It's not about that. It's just that God's saying, let it all go. And I don't know where everything will fall. I am fully confident that there are many awesome people who could take on different aspects or components of it, or maybe not. Like, I don't know what God has, but this is the letting go for me, because I've cared so deeply about UChurch. And especially in this last stint where I really felt to step in fully in a particular way. It's another story for another time. But I have carried this transition in my heart for the family in a very deep way. And so it's not just about the job or the practicals of it at all. It's just actually letting go something that I felt called into, and handled with God's great, like, there was this grace on it that was like, it actually was fun. And it's stuff that I don't necessarily, it's not my whole life I've just pursued after opportunities to do finances, but it was because of what God was doing in the midst, this undoing of the old and positioning us as a family for the new. And so that's probably been my fear, is making it hard on other people as a result of me stepping out.
And just for context for everybody, and Jamila's got her hand up. We'll get to your question in a sec, Jamila. But one of the things, just for those who may not know, but UChurch's history, in a sense, one of the words that's been spoken over by 3 different prophets that don't know each other over the course of many years was the word prototype. And we used to think prototype was a cookie cutter. You build a prototype and then you make a bunch that are just like that. But he helped us to understand that is not the definition of prototype. Prototype is the internal structure, the internal engine, if you will, is, if we know, would say the love of God would be him. And everything around it keeps changing, getting upgraded or shifted based on circumstance, situations. In a lot of ways, the Church of God is going to keep doing what it's been doing through human history, but doing it very differently. And that's why structures and systems can hinder that. And Jodie has been amazing at watching it. We've just at the beginning, this memory comes to us. I remember when we got together initially years ago, I remember thinking, God, we don't want to be a church that's internal focus. We want to be external focus, like your heart is. And financially, our goal was to get to 80% of all the finances that was coming into the church would go to mission. We got to 67% back in the day. But then you can hang on to that as the goal. That's what we're trying to do. And God says, no, I'm the precious pearl of great price. Keep close to me. And so that's this transition. I guess, Jodie, one of the practical question, what's the not knowing what the future like? Does that create a sense of anxiety in you, or a sense of excitement? And what about others that might be listening to this down the road and saying, well, I've been wondering if I'm supposed to let go and step into something new as well. What would you say to that?
I can honestly say the stepping into the unknown is the fun part of this. For me, the letting go in this particular scenario is for sure the hard part. It's funny. I sensed before this like concrete decision came, that God was going to shift some things around to make space for new, to like step into a few things that were in my heart to do. Granted, in the process, he's changed the scope of what some of those things are, etc. But at the core, that's remained the same. And so I can honestly say that I'm excited for the new. That's not been the case for every transition I've been through. Sometimes it's terrifying to step into something unknown. But in this particular one, for me, I'm like, bring it on. I cannot wait. But my fear is in the letting go. Or not my fear. Well, I mean, there is fear involved, but the challenge and wanting to do it with the Lord and transition so that it doesn't cause that pain for others. And I don't need to take that on. I'm learning in this process. And I think I know that in my brain, of course, like God's got this for sure. It's in so many places where I've coached others through transition. It's like, you need to make a space for what God's doing next for people to step in. But there's still something in me that doesn't want anyone to have to like go through pain, you know? And so, yeah, I think that the unfolding of this, the reason I started catching the fact that there might be a shift is because I knew very clearly, like God had told me, just make space for the new. I just misunderstood or took into my own hands what that actually would look like for the first part of this year, to be honest. And it was really challenging. It actually was hard. And again, that's another story in and of itself, but classic, where you know the ultimate thing that God's calling you not into, but that there's a shift. And then I tried figuring it out to answer that and make that space in a different way than what God had ultimately intended. But it's fine. It's all rolled out in his sovereignty wonderfully, I think.
Yeah. Let's just, for the sake of time, we'll be concise here, but Jamila, if some of you have a couple of questions aimed at this, I'm sure Jodie would be ready to receive it. But Jamila, you had your hand up, so.
Sure. Thanks, Brent. I hope you can hear me. Jodie, thanks for sharing that. And my question is, and it's okay if you don't have a clear answer. I think it's really exciting to hear what you are transitioning out of, but I'm curious, do you have a sense in your heart moving forward, kind of what gates or doors is being opened in the spirit that you're moving into? You have a sense of that? And if you don't, it's totally okay. I'm just kind of excited to hear kind of what's in your heart.
Yeah, I would say I have a sense for sure. And part of it is to ironically help people through transition. Like, as people become aware and free in their hearts to actually step into what they want to do, oh my gosh, like those are the funnest conversations that I am so excited about. I've had ideas for years. This has been my ideas to start a podcast on with a theme of wisdom. And I don't know why I never have, but it just, I think through that filter often. And I think of, oh man, it'd be so fun to interview this person or to talk about this thing. And it comes through in a way that is yeah, it's just the next, like, wisdom is just this beautiful, it just makes sense. It's, you know, like it's one of these things that when you encounter it, it's profound yet simple. And so, yeah, that's just an area that I would love to study more and just ponder more. But really, I think the transition has to do with making space to draw that out of people. Now, that could be originally, and like I said at the beginning of the year, I started getting a sense of this, and the scope was in the context of UChurch, which I think it still is. Like, hey, how do we like see what's in people's hearts and help them step into stuff? But I am now excited about business, about education. Like, there's like outside of the church mountain kind of thing. And so I think some of the things I'm sensing, I have no clear idea for sure, but it's just this I think that's at the core of it is how do we lay down tracks and process with people to see us living in the kingdom as sons and daughters practically. So that's all I'll say about that one. I could probably talk in circles and maybe make some really profound points because it's what I'm passionate about, but I'll end it there for now.
Rob, Donna, you had a question.
Yeah. Jodie, it sounds like it's been a kind of a step-by-step realization that you're being going transition. My question is, when in your heart, when did you get, or what was the first inkling that, oh, I'm supposed to do something? And then if you could tell us a little bit about the process of different steps in that, of hearing and how you heard it, what did that look like for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned at the beginning of the year, I remember actually chatting with a few people and just saying, I really feel like I need to make more time for some of these other things. And what that looks like for admin and finances. I think I just want to get it so that I can oversee it, but not have as much time involvement. And so that's what I started working towards. We also, at the same time, I was part of this, we were doing a prayer assignment, some intercession over our generation, and kind of digging into some of the stuff in the past of UChurch and just praying through that. And it was so amazing. It was really connecting with some of the things that I'd carried in my heart for our family for a really long time, like years. And God was finally bringing some of this stuff, not to the surface, but just like addressing it in intercession and listening prayer and repentance and also. And there's a group of us doing that. And some of it was over my generation of when we stepped into UChurch, as there was a group of us. Well, anyone who was around back then, like I said, most of us were like in university or just outside of, and a number of us went into full-time ministry. And so that's how I, in probably 99, 2000, I began actually like raising support to work with UChurch. Anyway, we were praying into some of the stuff, and a lot of it was just like, you could see how amazing it was, what God did back then. Like, I was just constantly amazed in the process of this prayer time. But I also saw how I may have had a false responsibility and carried some things a little extra in my heart, because, I really deeply cared, and I didn't want to let people down and all of that. And I thought that for the most part, I dealt with all of these things in many different ways, just with the Lord on my own or through healing, prayer, whatever. Anyway, in this process, I began actually noticing, it was like from a day to the next almost, where suddenly a number of the tasks I was doing became frustrating. I didn't have this ease and grace that I had felt. And I really was like, what is going on in my heart, Lord? Like, are you bringing something up? And so I spent probably the next month just really like, as this would come up, I would repent and, just deal with it. And it was just like practical stuff that I'd done for years, but it just got a bit frustrating, and it didn't feel easy anymore. Emotionally easy, if that makes sense. Like, there's been hard things that we've done in the past and had to pray through and whatnot. But anyway, so that went on for a while, and I thought, you know what, I just need some time. Maybe I'm getting a little just burnt out, because like, we have had a lot of other staff leave. Like, the admin team used to be 4 and now it's down to me, and Eric it was Brant and Jen and Eric and I, and I'm like, maybe we just need a break. Like, there's so much change and shift. So we generally, as much as I could, took the month of July off, and I was like, okay, feeling good. August, I come back, and it is like worse than ever before. This just like, what is happening? Why am I so frustrated? I thought I was following what God had said, and stuff with the financial systems, and I just was more, the transition I was looking for just wasn't going well. And so I called someone. I would process with a few people, and one day I talked to someone, and they're like, maybe you had gone through, like, God just actually transitioned you. And I went, what do you mean? I said, like, how does this explain? Like, one day I was fine and the next day I wasn't. And he said to me, when a baby is born, one day they're on the inside, and then the next day they're on the outside. Like, maybe God has, despite you, taken you through a transition. And he actually said, he said, because you have such a loyalty, he's probably needing to like get your attention, because I just would assume that this was always something in my heart, and working it out. And I sat with that for about 2-3 weeks, just going, could this be? And in the whole time I'm talking with, I was like very honest with Brant and Jen, and so it's not like this was like some inner fuming underneath the surface, which was so delightful. People, like, I love having the capacity to process this safely. Where, anyway, they were really supportive, and my wonderful husband, super supportive. But I just processed this with people. It was just very confirming that, yeah, maybe. But the kicker, the clarity came because I kept on trying to figure out other ways just to like maybe let a few other things go and really not like yank myself out of this whole thing, because that just didn't seem like an option. I was like, how could God be asking me to do that? Because I'm pretty sure that I can carry out everything in my heart in these boundaries. Like, they're beautiful boundary lines, the boundaries of UChurch. Like, it's fine. Anyway, it was at where was it? In October. I think it was at a reunion of sorts, the Father Heart, we were taking time and listening. And oh my gosh, it was just this clarity where God said, you actually have to die to it all. You have to let it all go. And from there, that was when my brain caught up with what I think God had done like 6 months before. I was a little slow on the uptake on this one, which just still surprises me, because I'm like, I love transition. So it was hard that I missed this one, but ultimately it was just lots of processing. And what's neat is after it, I felt such a peace that I don't have to actually figure out all the details. All I know is this one, like, I actually went through, I chatted with Dave one day, as I'd shared with our board, this transition with Rob and Justin and Dave Brandt, that this was up, and they were so like supportive and happy. And Dave's like, okay, let's actually write down what you do. And what was neat is in that process of letting him help me process just everything, there was like a neat line that God drew, like, let go of this right now, this, and this. And there's some other stuff that might need to be let go, but I don't know yet. And he's not asking me to. I just have such a clarity on the exact things to let go. And that's probably all my little brain can handle right now. And I'm fine with that. And it's really good. And it's clear. Even though there's a lot of fuzziness around it. Did that answer your question?
That was an awesome answer. It gave me a lot of encouragement and direction on my transitions and doing it in the body and the community, and relying on processing it with people. It sounds like it started for you with a feeling inside. There was some prayer. There was that big transition of I don't feel peace anymore to grappling through it with people in a safe place, and then ending up with some details with Dave. Oh, this goes. This maybe hold on a bit. And then peace came. That's a wonderful picture.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Here's a question, and maybe we'll summarize it. We don't want to cut it off, but we want to kind of move it so that Eric, when he edits this for later use, it's not an hour and a half. But I guess two things. One, Jodie, I can remember, one of the biggest transitions in my life was after, many years in the corporate world downtown. Not that all of it was in there, but there was a transition for me to step away from that world into what people call the church world. And it was weird. For those who knew me back then, I fasted, I prayed, I went away. Are you sure you know what you're doing, God? Blah, blah, blah. And I look at it now and I go, the neatest thing about transitions is this whole verse in Isaiah, it says, you don't have to keep dwelling on the past. In fact, stop. Don't even remember those former things. And I would keep remembering back to what I thought it would, like there was this tie in the heart to the familiar. It says, I'm doing something brand new, something unheard of. In other words, you haven't heard it all yet. It's not like here's the lightning bolt in the sky and here's your life, step into it. It's not yet understood yet or heard. Even now it sprouts and grows and matures. Don't you perceive it? And the question, it's an interesting question. Don't you perceive it? And I find it's fascinating that, for those who are listening to this after the live recording, I can say right now, there's a whole bunch of faces on the screen. I'm not going to say names because it would, but I know a good proportion of everybody here is going through incredible, unique transitions. And so many of them are perceiving it and taking steps they're big. They're just big steps that it seems. It doesn't fully clearly look yet clear on what it is and that kind of stuff, but there's something about this understanding of what's going on in the heart. And when he says, then the promise is, don't you perceive it? And then he says, I will make a way in that wilderness, the wilderness of the transition. The transition from Egypt to the promised land was a long transition. And there's lots of things that speak to that you can go through it faster, but you can't go faster than the speed of God, because it's a heart transition. It says, I will make a way in the wilderness and open up flowing streams in the desert. So when it feels like, oh, I don't know who I am or what's going on, there's this place where he promises to be there and keep nurturing. And so on a note, Jodie, and this can be edited, that little part, we can take it out. But the part that I think, I remember when the moment happened for me, as God prepared me pretty rushed to take a big transitional step. It happened, I could hear it, and then it took 3 years for it physically to fully come into pair. But in my case, what would you say to someone out there that maybe they're doing something, maybe they're supposed to step into some of these roles that you've been doing? Maybe that's like, instead of thinking of it as a, this or that, what would you say to those people? Or would you invite them in? How would you describe that? There's a pondering. There's someone, there's voices out there, there's people out there that he's moving in their hearts for transition. And some of them might be into doing something that he did to you, 20 some years ago.
I certainly hope that that's the case. I'm pretty sure that he's got this figured out. So I love the fact that as we move with the Spirit, space is made for other people to move with the Spirit. So I overall, this has kind of been tied to that fear question. Like, what's my biggest fear in this is that how will God provide for this to actually work out? And I know that the answer is in the family, in some way, shape, or form. And so I don't know. I mean, practically, I don't know if this is in response to what you said, but hey, if anyone wants to step into this, if God is pushing something in your heart to just have a conversation, it's going to unfold in a conversation. This is not like putting a job posting and someone fills it and they're the most qualified and they, maybe it'll happen that way. That would be cool. But I think ultimately it's how is he going to provide for the family? I think that I look forward to the conversations with people to see if they feel a part of the stepping into this and in whatever way. It doesn't have to look anything like how I did it. And I'm perfectly excited about that. Not perfectly, but I'm very excited about that. So, I think that as you've heard and as you know from the millions of transitions everyone's gone through in their lives, these things take time. And sometimes because it's a practical thing, you think it needs to necessarily follow a very, obvious route. But sometimes it's just, even the finances can be a journey. So, yeah.
Yeah. I would offer a perspective that is just simply whatever you're leaving or whatever he's drawing us out of, or he'll show you that there's a promised land and it's within you. We've talked about this now over the last few years that, you're not becoming someone different. You're actually unbecoming everything that has hindered you getting to live. As Christ says, for freedom's sake, Christ set us free. That freedom to live as that son or a daughter, that Ephesians 2:10, all those good works that he's had stored up from before the foundations of the earth for you, as a uniqueness of you. No one else has ever lived Jodie's life, and no one ever will. Mm-hmm. No one has ever lived your life the way you have, and no one ever will live the life that you're going to continue to live from this moment. That's how unique you are. And that's his family. He loves that. And our awareness in the journey, if you will, or the adventure, as I like calling it, is you will be different between now and a year from now or 6 months from now. That's his promise. I will complete the work I've started in you and continue to do that. But it's not a journey in the sense that it's an adventure, in the sense that everything, you're not arriving somewhere new. You're actually discovering who you truly, fully are in him. And oftentimes where he leads us is into places, definitely through wildernesses, to reveal some of those fears, some of those doubts, some of those questions. It really, and then things around us shake. And obviously it brings, we don't know what we don't know until the pressure's on, and now we know. And leading into those moments, we would love to, let's face it, most of us like to get through the wilderness overnight. We wouldn't necessarily, we'd like shortcuts. Can you just please answer my prayer, God? This is painful. And I can't underscore it enough that the pain is not you're doing something wrong. The pain is that our hearts are tied to things that ultimately will limit us from discovering what's really in our heart to do. And we likely don't know until we experience some of that pain and face it and the challenges of that. But that's why he puts us in family. The intention of a church family is not to call us to a mission and a vision together and do what some leader says we're, his heart and vision. It's to support one another. It's to encourage each other to keep growing in this. It is basically him mothering and fathering us through their hearts, those coals, if you will. And that fire burns off a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. That love takes care of a lot of fear. It casts it out. It displaces it. And all we know is that orphanship, that sense of ego, that sense of identity that gets thrown up when pressures come, the shaking in the world right now. It's unfortunate watching the division, even in the body of Christ, but talking to leaders around the world, they all see the reality, the goodness of it, because it's revealing what's in people's hearts. It's the real state that there's been way too much, if you will, hope in the world systems, politics, education. They're not evil, but when we put our hope just in those things, that is missing what he's actually, the perfect will of God is that we would know his love, not know about it, but know it and be transformed by it. That's his whole entire point. And I love the fact that Romans 8:28 and 29, whatever we're going through, whatever we're experiencing, whatever we've said yes to, whatever we find ourselves in, he's ultimately working that for the good, that we could be transformed, that we become the very thing we're longing for, to belong and to be who we truly are, and to be seen and known, and to not just receive, but to give. It really is all about the receiving and giving of love, but it's not in a romantic sense that's part of it, but it's in the essence of who you are. We are made in his image, and his image is constantly redemption, constantly giving away. All these wonderful steps cause us to get to the place where we can become like more and more our heart like Jesus, unoffendable and more able to be who we are, that is living for the sake of others, not just for the sake of ourselves. In fact, our joy will be in the giving. So I'll leave it like this. It sounds like I'm going to put a commercial in from the board's perspective. But if you know of anybody, or since some people are in transition and they're alone in trying to process it, but maybe this is it. Maybe God's going to draw them into this crazy little world inside of UChurch and the family behind the curtain, and which would be an invitation into completely more transformation than likely you've experienced in other places. So, Lutz, you got your hand up?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is the first time that I'm using my own pad here.
Hey! That's a transition. There you go.
There's hope for me yet. Jodie, I'm just really excited. I was excited when you first started sharing with me that you were thinking that some transition was necessary. I'm totally in agreement with Isaiah 43, in that the Lord is moving on, and that we are not to support this structure that has this. For me, it's a governmental overlay, right? And we've talked about this before, and that by you, Jodie, transitioning out of this role, we have to be very careful that we don't just continue some of those roles and breathe into this body that God is no longer, really supporting. He truly is moving on, and what we're moving on to is becoming a community of sons and daughters, which is just totally different in its focus and its function, going forward. I don't know what it looks like, but this word ecclesia has become so meaningful for me, because God, or the Bible, never used never gave us a definition of what church has become. And I think we're all in agreement with the fact that he's into it, definitely a new thing, and that new thing is this loving community of sons and daughters. So I'm really excited by what is happening. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
So good, Lutz. I fully agree that with this shift, there will be some things that we also need to leave behind, and it will look new. And the invitation, I think, is to step into that discovery together and be a family. Yep.
And he didn't want you to spend more of your life supporting this thing that he's no longer into. I feel. I mean, I hope that doesn't insult anyone, but I really do believe that he has moved on.
Yep.
And wants to drag us along.
I love it. What's funny, I'll just say this, that in my history of some of the other things that I've done besides in UChurch, I've been part of the ending of a number of things, be it organizations or transitioning from closing down one structure so that it can live in a totally different form. So I would not be surprised if this is another one of those, well, I know it is. This has been this is very familiar in a good way. There's been a pattern of this where I find myself at the end of things to allow them to shift to what they need to in the future. And so you said that so beautifully. My heart was just very excited for that, because I think you just said,
as my identity was wrapped up in
so good.
Supporting this governmental overlay that I so detested. In the same way, God needs you to move on from supporting the thing that he's not into. So.
What I'm interested is how, since the new revelation, how that really helps you transition, because you have done so many transitions. So this transition must be different than any other transition.
Probably. It's very peaceful. I think that's the biggest thing. And it's exciting. And when I feel that fear, it's like not long lasting. It feels like it's kingdom, meaning, I think before it would be like I'd pray for an answer and then you'd execute on earth. It feels like there's this merging of heaven and earth in some of these things, like this real sense of just walking with the Spirit, being sons and daughters, ruling and reigning in just our day-to-day, not ruling, anyways, you know what I mean? But just like being in his presence in the day-to-day, and it looks like practical things. If that makes sense. I feel like there's been something that's connected for me in this one where it's we all get to do our part. He's doing a whole bunch of things all at the same time. It's not, this is just my unique thing. Like you just get to walk it out, and it feels very real and practical, yet very spiritual at the same time, if that makes sense. Like there's this joining. And I can honestly say before I would I think my way of going through them would be you'd encounter what was happening and then you'd spend lots of time, with the Lord praying, you get a strategy and then you'd execute. And this just feels more together, if that makes sense. And very peaceful. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Well, I'm going to mention this, that when I look online and feel free to take off if you want.